Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Raise the Vibe with Liz. I'm your host, Liz Peterson, and today I'm going to be interviewing Dianne Grob. Dianne and I go way back. I interviewed her for my radio show when I first started in 2019, and we had a great conversation. And I bumped into her at Women Hold the Key here on Vashon, and we had a beautiful conversation about death and dying after the women's circle that was there. And I wanted her to come on and talk about it. So I'm really happy that she's here. And I'm excited for you to hear her and her story about her brother. And it is my mother's birthday today, and it is her heavenly birthday. So I think this is a perfect conversation to be having about death and dying and all of the things we don't realize until we have that experience, and especially about society and how it functions. So, Dianne, I want to welcome you to the show. Thank you so much for joining me and sharing your story.
Thank you, Liz. I'm honored that you invited me.
Do you want to share
Yeah.
a little bit about yourself? I know you have a poem to share as well, and I think that would be a great way to start.
I don't think I want to share anything about myself. I think maybe it'll come out in the conversation, but I think the poem showed up today and it showed up for a reason. And so I think starting with that is correct.
Perfect.
And I will say it's written by Reginald Shepard, but I changed some of it to fit um, my situation with my brother. So, Reginald Shepherd, wherever you are, forgive me for. So, after midnight, everything becomes musical, like the names of flowers, names of diseases, for example, like pneumocystitis, Carinini pneumonia blossoming in your lungs to petals of infection closing the breath. I wouldn't want to make that beautiful, a self congratulating sadness in my blood. And then there's Kaposi's sarcoma, the harsh syllables pronounced across the skin, the purple lesions almost hyacinth like. No death is quite so flower like. The God who was in love, remember, turning away so not to spoil the composition. And then there's ALS, which is like a vine, a type of pink clematis, maybe, that twists and turns around whatever it can hold to. And we reach for it because there's grace and beauty in the clematis, but also fragility that wants to be touched with tenderness. How afraid I am of your petals falling, the last breath slipping out silently.
Hmm. Thank you, Dianne. Thank you for sharing that. Would you like to share a little bit about your brother and his journey?
Do you have a sense of where you want me to start? I know where I'll start. My brother was an alcoholic for 40 years, and so our relationship was very narrow, and we lived 2,000 miles apart. When he got sober, I became his person in a way. Um, we talked every week for 2 to 3 hours, and we told each other everything. And There were so many things I hadn't known about my brother that I was so grateful to have. First of all, I was so grateful that he was sober. And to celebrate his sobriety, I took him to the Grand Canyon, um, which he had trouble accepting the gift because I wanted to pay for everything. But that trip will remain in my mind as the center point of my relationship with my brother. So 3 years ago, he started having symptoms, little ticks and aches in his legs. And the one symptom that is specific to ALS is that you cry or laugh kind of inappropriately. Like someone says something sad and you start laughing, or there's a funny show on and you start crying. And my brother did his Google research and he said, I have ALS. And his doctor said, you don't have ALS. And his family said, you don't have ALS. But he did have ALS. And at first, the progression of it was slow. You know, one muscle would go, another muscle would go. He could still walk. He started losing his voice. Then he went to not being able to eat and having to be tube fed. And I'm so grateful I was there then so I could watch how he was with this huge change of never being able to eat his favorite foods again. I told him when he first was diagnosed that because he had been so strongly involved in AA, that he knew more about surrender and acceptance than anyone I knew, and that if anyone could go through the process of ALS with grace, it was him. And he did. He did. He didn't want pity. You know, he needed to be cared for, but he did not want pity. And so that was a year ago, maybe even a year ago today, that I saw him for the last time, although I didn't know it was the last time. And I wonder if I had known what I would have done differently when I hugged him, when I looked into his eyes. And I think that's one of the big questions that we'll get to later. How we never know. And what if we treated each moment like this is the last time? And how do I want to be? So over the last year, his progression went more quickly. And pretty soon he was wheelchair bound. But even then, they sent movies to me and he would be rolling around the house in his electric wheelchair laughing. And he lost weight, which he didn't have to lose, but he got thin. Um, my niece, who's 50, I believe, moved in to help Joe's wife, Vonnie, care for him. So he never had to leave. He was never hospitalized, or he didn't have to go to a hospice center. Um, but it really, the process expedited really quickly. I thought for sure I would see him in April. That was my intention. But he died on March 6th. So um, the week before that, at that point, we were texting every night and we were praying together over text. I haven't prayed for 50 years, but it's another gift his illness and death gave me, is that I started praying. And boy, he never ever complained to me. He would tell me how he was, and he would always ask, how was I? And that really struck me about his lack of selfishness. Like he was dying, and he still wanted to hear how I was and how my husband was. And I mean, just in our culture in general, so many people don't ask, how are you? Especially if they're suffering. How are you? But he would always ask. And so I was planning a trip in April, and the week before he died, although I didn't know this at the time, an owl came, excuse me, an owl sat on the tree right outside our house for 5 days. And I knew it was a messenger because I look for messages and I feel messages and I intuit messages. And so one day I went out to the tree and the owl never moved. She wasn't afraid of me. I think our faces were 4 to 5 feet apart, and she just looked straight into my eyes and she said, your brother is going to die soon. And 5 days later, he died. I knew something was wrong in the morning when I hadn't gotten a text back from him from the night before. He always responded, no matter how badly he was doing. And I was walking home from our little tiny town here on Vashon, and I got a bolt of lightning through my body. And I knew. And I came home and my phone rang almost immediately, and my niece's name came up on the phone. And I said, he's gone, isn't he? And she said, yes, he just left. Just left peacefully, surrounded by his wife and two of his adult children. Um, and my niece and I were just, I mean, in that moment, I shattered, which I've never, I lost my mother to COVID. I did not shatter with that death. But with my brother, I just shattered like if somebody had thrown a rock through a window. And what I learned through that shattering was that if I could stay with the feeling of being shattered and crying so much. After a few weeks, the through the cracks in me, this gratitude started coming through, and this joy, and this desire to be alive. And I saw beauty everywhere in people, in all the flowers that are blooming. And one thing, personal thing about me is I had been depressed since I was 12, and I'm now 72. And for the first time in my life, I didn't wake up with dread. For all these years, I would wake up and think, oh, another day. But now, and there's so many parting gifts that Joe gave me. This may be the biggest, that my desire now to live, to get up in the morning, to do what's there for me to do is so strong. And I learned that sorrow and joy hold hands in us. Um, if we can let ourselves feel the depth of the sorrow, we will also be able to feel the depths of joy. It's another thing we could talk about culturally. You know, people want you to get over it. Aren't you over it yet? Or you're still crying, or, and I understand that's because people are afraid of death, and they're afraid of strong emotions in others and in themselves. So I had been a practicing psychotherapist for 40 years before I retired, and I worked with a lot of people in grief. And mostly they just wanted me to help them not feel so bad. And I wish now I had had the experience I've had since Joe died. I could have offered more to my clients around grieving and around the beauty of grieving and what it can actually bring to life. So,
Thank you, Diane. I'd actually want to pause for a second and say thank you for sharing the story about your brother and his illness and his death. And I want to parse out a few things, starting with the gift that we spoke about, that you just spoke about, that first one where you saw the beauty in life and you wanted to live. And I think this is an experience that a lot of people experience after a loss of a loved one. I know I experienced it myself. And would you be willing to share deeply or share more about that experience for our listeners?
I'm willing. I'm trying to think of what's important to say.
And that gift to you, how it's benefited you now.
Yes, I wake up every morning and I'm not sleeping well. Since he died, I'm sleeping enough, but I wake up and I can't wait to get up. My morning coffee, I notice how good it tastes. I notice what it's like to look out the window at our forest, and I walk into town and I look. It's like my sensations woke up. My hearing, I hear the birds more. I see more what's been there in front of me all along. Um, I I want. I didn't when I was depressed, I did not have the energy or the desire to be very involved with places like the Women's Center. And now I go to a grief group there, a storytelling group there, Sunday, the monthly Sunday gatherings, and just yesterday I decided to join them in the Strawberry Festival parade and get a bunch of women. We're going to dress as garden goddesses. I would never have been able to do that before. It would seem like, oh, that's so much work. But I feel alive, alive, which broken down is a life. I have a life now that I want. Also, I'm much more aware of, I'm still talking about the gifts
Please.
of Joe's death. I'm much more aware of my own mortality and my husband's. I'm 72, he's 76. Like now, whenever we say goodbye, when one of us leaves the house, we look at each other and say some version of, if this is the last time I see you, never forget how much I love you. And it's so beautiful. We've been married 40 years. We've gone through a lot in those 40 years. It hasn't been easy. Um, I think this is the best time in our marriage. We're like talking more, fighting more, dancing more, this being sweeter. Um, and all of that feels like a gift of being shattered and things that were deeply held inside me because of early childhood trauma, which is a whole nother conversation. These things weren't being held in anymore because once the glass shattered, everything that had been inside waiting to get out had an escape route.
Yeah, and you were saying while we were talking, um, just recently at the tea shop that you're no longer on your medication anymore. That is a gift.
I have 40 years on antidepressants, and one day I just knew I didn't need them anymore. Yeah, that's a huge gift.
Amazing. And I think that translates into holding that sorrow and joy. So I know after my mother passed, I was grieving, and it's a process and it shows up differently every day. I'm experiencing it today in my body. My body is reacting to it being my mother's birthday today. I was upstairs putting clothes away and I could feel how weak my body was. And I
Mhm.
remembered and recognized that friend, that weakness, you know, because I
I-
experienced it after my mother died.
is it weakness or is it fragility, or are they the same?
I think it's the same. Lethargic, weak, physically weak, tired,
Yeah.
cranky stomach. And I noticed that during that process and now we can hold that sorrow and the joy because life goes on. After my mother's death, life went on. Things still happened in life. Um, Joyful things would happen. And I realized I could hold the grief and the joy. My perception changed as you were talking about. And I think that is one of the best gifts that I received through experiencing death in my life was seeing the beauty of life and waking up in tears to um, that knowledge that life is beautiful. And like you, Diane, I felt a renewed desire to live and a new relationship with death. I would like you to share a little bit about your experience with that, being able to hold that sorrow and that joy, and what that looks like for you.
Well, first I'll say it's unexpected. No, no one has ever, probably because I've never experienced a loss like this, but no one has ever said to me, sorrow and joy, they're holding hands. But you have to really let yourself go into the sorrow. Um, what did you ask me, Liz?
What is that experience?
Was there a question?
Yeah, what was that experience, or how has that experience been for you? And you can even, bring in, how society doesn't support the grieving process if you would like.
Well, what I noticed was many people, well, I shouldn't say many, a few people who I thought were close friends, I didn't hear from. Initially, right after Joe's death, but then I was no fun to be around for a while. And so, okay, I get it. it's too hard for you to come face to face with death, with your own mortality, with the feelings that might be generated in you from what I say. Um, I just think our culture is so not just about death, but about everything, like the environmental crisis, global warming, who's running our government right now, what's being taken away from the poorest of the poor. Um, I think I can safely say most people want to turn away from that and not feel the feelings about what's happening in our world. Um, and in my experience, turning away from feelings has us also turning away from life itself and the joy and beauty that is side by side with how awful things are right now in the world. There, I mean, Joanna Macy's work is probably the only work I have been close to that really invites people to bring out their grief, bring out their anger, bring out their rage, bring out their resignation and hopelessness. And where when Joanna does a workshop, um, the person speaking is held by all the people in the workshop. There's no back and forth, there's no response to what the person is saying. There's just the presence, the witnessing of what people are going through. And I think we all need that. And I think if I'm being called to do something more at this time of my life, which is a question for me since I retired, is there more for me to do? That would be what it would be. Teaching people how to be with whatever it is that they're feeling and not turn away. And I can say honestly that Joe's death is the first time I refused to turn away. And so it's the first time I've really experienced the possibilities around not turning away. Back in the 80s, part of my depression got hooked in with the nuclear crisis, the Exxon Valdez oil spill, the Chernobyl blast. I mean, I would weep for hours over the loss of life. But at some point, I shut down, and I also didn't have enough of my own inner holding to hold those really big events in the world. Um, so it's another gift Joe gave me. I can hold this sometimes unbearable grief that I'll never hug him again. sometimes when I say that, I'll never hug him again. It's my brain hasn't caught up totally. That's another thing I've learned since this death about the neurobiology of grieving, how our neurological system is wired to have this person in our life, to have the world be a certain way, to expect and count on, um, and when that's taken away, like Joe was taken away, I fell down 6 times in the first month of after his death, and 6 times. Yeah, I still have bruises. And fortunately, I have practitioners who know about the neurobiology of grief, and they said, this isn't that you have a bad hip and you need a hip replacement, or you have bad knees, or your muscles are giving out, or they're like, of course, your brain is trying to catch up with the reality of this loss, and it hasn't yet. And it shouldn't. It takes time, however long it takes. So, this is another gift of having fallen down those times and then being told why that was happening. I'm walking really slowly. I'm paying much more attention to where I put my feet. And because I don't want to fall again. If I have to fall again, well, so be it. But there are ways you can work with yourself to try to help your brain catch up. And one is really to find physical balance in your feet on the ground. Um, and pull the grounding energy up through your body all the way to the top of your head. So I've been doing that, and
Diane, you also shared a story with me about finding balance with your father after another
you
in your life.
want me to talk about that?
I would love you to share that.
Well, I left home when I was 19 because, well, my father's never going to hear this, but I hated him. And I was terrified of him, which I now see is why I got depressed, because I had to protect my feeling, my tender self from the fear I was feeling. I had no capacity at age 12 to be afraid of my father. It's not like he physically abused any of us, but his own trauma had left him needing to control everything and be perfect and have us perfect. And I could never live up to that. I'm this wild child, and, I'm, I, I wasn't the right child for somebody that needed a controlled, quiet child. I got an F in conduct in kindergarten because I talked too much. How can you give an F to a 4-year-old for talking too much? Anyway, I left home. Life was easier being away from my father, but I still had to see him once a year. I went home. I wanted to see the whole family. It was always, I would get migraine headaches before I left for Ohio, and oh, it was awful. Um, then my mom died of COVID in 2020. And it's the first time I've ever witnessed my father shattered. He, the first time I talked to him after she died, he wailed. I don't mean just a little sobbing. He wailed like a baby in a crib who needs to be picked up. And I said, Dad, and my heart just softened towards him right away. Whenever anyone is vulnerable with me, it's all barriers come down. I said, Dad, what can I do for you? I'm 2,000 miles away. And he said, will you call me every day? We've talked every day for 4.5 years. I added it up the other week just so he and I could laugh about it. It's over 1,000 hours we've talked, which I would say in my entire childhood living with him, we never talked. I mean, we never talked. So, and I have forgiven him. When he dies, it's going to be another shattering because I love him so much now. He has shared with me things that I tell him, Dad, no daughter wants to know about her father's sex life, especially when it involves her mother. No daughter wants to have to buy you underwear. Which is, and he and I have the same kind of dark humor, and we laugh. Oh, we're getting some good laughs out of the Trump's antics. And we pee our pants. We both pee our pants. And we have peed our pants while we've been talking a half a dozen times, maybe more. And so picture my father. He's 95. He has a walker. And he's even with the walker, he has to shuffle. So we start laughing and he says, I'm gonna pee my pants. I'm I have to go to the bathroom, so just hold on. So I hold on, I hear him shuffling, with the walker and his slippers, and I hear him shuffling, and he's like, damn, I didn't make it. There's several times I didn't make it to the bathroom, but I think this is why my mom died first. This was her biggest gift to me in her death, that she gave me my father. She gave me, I was always mad at my mother for not protecting Joe and I from our father's tirades, his need to control, his need for us to be perfect. Um, so she gave me him. She left my dad to me. And That's the hugest gift. I said to him the other day, Dad, how much longer do you think you're going to live? And he said, oh God, I hope not much longer. I mean, he's wanted to die since she died. They were high school sweethearts. And I said, well, Dad, do you want me to hire somebody to come in and take you out? It was a joking thing because they don't have death with dignity in Ohio, and he's not dying, so they wouldn't have it anyway.
Yeah.
And he said, no, don't hire anybody. I'll try to run my walker into a wall and hit my head hard enough that I whatever. And that made us laugh. That made us laugh. So what does he do the next week? He runs into the wall, crashes his head, falls to the floor. Not a single bone broke, no blood was shed. I said, Dad, you can't even kill yourself.
Oh my gosh.
And then we laugh. We laugh because he wasn't trying to kill himself. He just fell.
Mm.
Um, so what I realize is when he dies, not only am I going to miss him, not in the same way I miss Joe, but what am I going to do with that 8 o'clock hour where when I've talked to him every day for 4.5 years? It's going to be like my brain. Something else I was going to say about that, but I
Have to
think I've
enjoy
lost
those
it
moments
now.
while we have them and have gratitude for those moments, even knowing that those moments are going to come to an end. I believe that falls under the category of pre-grief, where we know one day this is not going to happen. One day at 8 o'clock, I'm not going to be able to talk to my dad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just remembered what I was going to say. When he dies, I will be the last living member of my nuclear family. All the people who knew me all my life will be gone. I mean, I have family, my sister-in-law and I are close, and I love my nieces and nephews, and now there's grandnieces and nephews, and I love them all. But I can feel already the aloneness of being the last member standing. No one on the planet will have known me for my entire life. And we'll see what gift comes out of that when it happens.
Yeah. I read something, a line in an email this morning that really struck me. It was about impermanence, that the only thing we can count on, and that is that life and the things in it, it's impermanence. There's always change, and to be open to that change and be flexible. And I think that's another thing that death teaches us as well.
We have no control.
Yeah. Another thing, excuse me, another thing we talked about, Diane, was regret. And how that shows up as part of the grieving process.
Yes. Stephen Jenkinson, the death and dying wizard who wrote Die Wise, and he worked with dying people for 40 years, and he's now dying. He said, we have to accept and take in and live with our regrets. This is mine to live with. I regret that I didn't see my mom before she died. I could have very easily asked for somebody to put me on the cell phone so I could have said goodbye to her. It never occurred to me. I regret that. Even though I didn't know Joe was going to die this soon, I regret that I didn't really look him in the face and hold his face and say, if I never see you again, please know how much you have meant to me. And I think the challenge is to live with the regret. And some people would say it's a bad thing. Let go of the regret. There's nothing you can do about it anyway. It's in the past. What happened happened. And Stephen Jenkins said we should all make stone piles of all our regrets. So when you have a regret, put it on the cairn. And then the next regret, put it on the cairn. Make it a ritual. Make it embodied, your regret. And I love that because, again, in our culture, no one wants to feel regret. No one wants to pay attention to what they wish they'd done or something they did that they wish they hadn't done. And to not live with that is doing a disservice to our humanity. That's what I believe. I'm not saying it's easy. I think it's maybe one of the hardest parts of losing someone you're really attached to is to really allow the regrets to be present. It honors the dead person in a way.
Yeah, I think so too. And it points to those moments where we wanted to be there a little longer or say something we didn't get to say or do something we didn't want to do. And I think that just points to love.
Yeah. It's all love. It just takes different forms.
Dianne, is there anything else that you would like to share before we are complete with our interview today?
Well, I'm very grateful to you, Liz, for inviting me to do this. One of the things I read, um, I got a book, a grief book to write in, and they had some things at the beginning and some suggestions on write what you could write. And one of them said, say the dead person's name. Say Joe, Joe. Say his name. It's a litany. Say his name, not my brother. Say, Joe, so thank you for inviting me here where I got to say his name many times.
You're welcome. It's been an honor.
It's been an honor for me too.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for being here and sharing in the space with us and listening to Dianne and her story. And we send everyone so much love. Thank you, Dianne.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.